We have some people from Houston, from London. Thank you so much for attending this conversation. So let's go ahead and get started. We want to be mindful of time here. I'm Kashima Pearson, Assistant Director of Alumni Communities and Volunteer Engagement within our Alumni Relations team. And I'm very excited to welcome all of you to our Mind Your Career webinar entitled How to Get into Climate Change Careers. This will be a panel discussion today, and we are accompanied by accomplished alumni and staff who have pursued a career in the climate change and sustainability industry. And they'll be sharing a little bit about how they have navigated to where they are today. So today we are joined by our moderator, Will Lutterman, Director of STEM Programs at the university. And then we have Alex Berkowitz, CEO of Coastal Protection Solutions. Another panel, Matthew Solomon, Senior Analyst at the Climate Policy Initiative, and Marielle Rasingham from the Clean Energy Policy Lead at Front and Center. Thank you so much for joining us today during today's webinar. Definitely feel free to drop your questions in the chat box and we will get to them during the Q&A. And then following today's session, a pop-up survey will appear. So please share your thoughts about your experience. And lastly, we are recording this session and we will follow up with this recording by the end of the week. So definitely feel free to keep a lookout for that email. With that said, please welcome our panelists.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It is wonderful to see everybody here today. And it's really exciting to see Maroons joining us from really across the country and across the world here. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Will Luderman. I'm the Director for STEM Programs here at the college in the Office of Career Advancement. For those of you who are maybe a little bit more older alumni, that would have been the CAPS office, Career and Placement Services. In addition to working at the college, I'm also a current boothie, so around both the college and booth these days. At the college, I do a lot of work matching student talents to careers in science, technology, including all things climate, energy, environment, conservation, oceans, policy, and beyond. Students today have a really diverse set of interests about tackling climate and environmental issues. In addition to working directly with students, I work with partners in climate and energy to help match students to internships, bring them out into market to meet with employer partners, as well as help manage a lot of our bilateral relationships with things like the UNFCCC annual conference of parties meetings that we bring students to, and other kinds of think tanks and advocacy groups that we partner with. Before coming to the college, I worked in DC, I worked in energy for a while, and I'm really excited today to have a conversation about climate careers. It's such a diverse field in so many ways that you can really have a climate career that is basically any job function, almost any industry. There's lots of room based on your personal interests, geographic preferences, and just personal ideas about how you want to make an impact. Truly think that this is a once in a generation kind of opportunity for all of us here to think about how we want to match our talents to one of the largest ongoing efforts to change society and the economy at large. But that is enough for me. I just want to give you a background of who I am. I'm really excited for a number of partners here today, a number of alums from the college. I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because I really want to dig into their experiences, their inspirations, their backgrounds, and where they see their organization, their industry headed. So without any further ado, let's turn it over to our panelists. Panelists, first question off the bat, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what inspired you to pursue a career in climate or sustainability. And if you could answer that question while you introduce yourself and your background, that would be great. So Alex, you're the first one on my screen. Why don't we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. So hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here. My name is Alex Berkowitz, and I am the founder and CEO of Coastal Protection Solutions. I graduated the college in 2002 with a degree in visual arts. Coastal Protection Solutions protects coastal communities from hurricanes and typhoons by harnessing a technology called the wave breaker, which decreases, it's a wave speed bump that decreases the height and velocity of waves to decrease erosion and damage from hurricanes. And it also produces wave energy. And we're also going to be working on a system that integrates sensors into it. So my story comes from a climate crisis. In 2012, my hometown of Rockaway Beach, New York, was devastated by Hurricane Sandy. My parents had 9 feet of water in the basement, and it took 2 days to pump out. And I lived 2 blocks away from the beach, and so I took a walk to the beach, saw it completely eroded, saw the homes kind of smashed in half, and thought of a idea, something floating in the ocean that would decrease the height and velocity of waves. And that's where the wave breaker was formed. At the time, I had absolutely zero engineering or design experience, but I knew that this was something that was extremely important. And fast forward about 8 years after that, I decided to go to grad school at the Harvard Graduate School of Design to pursue the design of the wave breaker. And while I was in school, I started Coastal Protection Solutions.
Wow, thank you, Alex. Matthew.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here, and thank you to the UChicago staff for organizing, and Alex and Mario for joining as well. Great to hear from you. So my name is Matthew Solomon. I'm a senior analyst at an organization called Climate Policy Initiative. We are essentially a think tank that's focused on climate finance. So the intersection of climate change, international development, and the financial system. And we work on tracking the amount of money that's spent on addressing climate change across regions and sectors and uses, and who's providing the finance, who's receiving the finance, as well as thinking about ways to make that money more effective and increase the amount of capital that's being spent by using innovative financial instruments. I've been here for 4 years. I graduated from the college, and like many econ students at the time, I didn't really know what to do with that degree, and became a consultant and worked at an economic consulting firm called Cornerstone Research for 4.5 years, and decided that I had enjoyed that experience, but it wasn't really aligned with my values and what I wanted to dedicate my career to. So spent a lot of time attending events like this, talking to other alums who had made the transition, other people who worked in the sort of broader climate change space, and decided to make the career transition, and have been at CPI ever since. So really excited to be here. And I guess just as what inspired me, I think it was a sense of the issue was not being solved on the timeline that I had assumed it would be solved based on my previous education into it. I thought that people were working on it, and it turns out that it was not being addressed. And also just there, as Alex just talked about, there are all of these new innovative ideas that people were pursuing, and there was so much passion and excitement in the climate change and sustainability space that really excited me, and it seemed like kind of the industry to be in if you wanted to both help people and do something that's really interesting.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. Mario?
I graduated from the college in 2008 with a degree in international studies. I knew my whole life, a child of immigrants, born in Chicago, but the first one in my large family born in the US. But I was always drawn to the wider world, and thought of myself as like, I'm a global citizen before I'm anything else. And I did get to travel. I had the privilege to, I studied abroad a bit while I was at the college, international studies concentration. And after I graduated, I taught English in France for a year, thinking about what am I going to do next. I worked in Chicago for a year for a domestic violence agency, during which I was applying to law schools. Then I went to law school for 3 years at Columbia University in New York. Always thinking about kind of what's next, what can I do on more of a global scale. International law looked interesting. did internships to kind of explore that. And then worked in international development for a number of years, including living abroad. And so I transitioned to environmental work after that, following just a lot of media attention on kind of how close we are to kind of climate disaster and catastrophe. So I didn't have that background in terms of my education or anything in science, but I just felt like this is a universal issue. So I shifted once I moved from the DC area to the West Coast following my partner's job transition. And yeah, I'll speak more to kind of the answer and some other questions that are coming up, but I took the opportunity to network, connected with a local organization here that does environmental justice and climate justice. And because of my law background, that was an easier transition because a lot of the focus is on human rights as well as social justice and the intersection with climate policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Marielle. It's really inspiring to hear that the three of you, everybody brought different, personal ideas and motivations kind of coming to the table here. So it's really great to hear that, folks have personal connections, issues around urgency and universalism here when it comes to climate. I'm starting to see some questions in chat, which is awesome. And we're going to get to those during the chat, during the broader Q&A, and excited that I think some of these will also be covered in our upcoming questions. So I want to dig in a little bit deeper behind some of your organizations. It's a diverse group of organizations, startup, think tank, working in advocacy. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your organization and who they are specifically, digging in a little bit deeper. And I want to kind of combine that with the next question I have on my list, a little bit about challenges, because I feel like this kind of feels kind of natural to think about not only, what your organization is, but sort of where you sit within it, whether you're in a leadership role or a more mid-level role, and what does that look like? Would love to hear a little bit more about some of your day-to-day challenges, what that looks like in the broader context of your organization. I hope that's not too much of one question, but I know these go together naturally. So would anybody like to start first? Otherwise, Marielle?
Happily. So I work for an organization called Front and Centered. We are a climate justice oriented coalition. And I know I spoke to that before, and I could, speak for a long time about climate justice and environmental justice. If you know about it, that's great. And if you don't, that's just because it feels like a new and emerging kind of concept in this work. And it isn't. It's been decades that people have really been concerned with and wanting to elevate the voices of marginalized, historically kind of underserved and disproportionately impacted communities in the climate conversation on the science side and certainly on the policy side, because it's really about power and who's making the decisions for how to kind of address the climate crisis, where to put what funds, and then how to also take a step back and look at how our society and how our economy and then how just our communities and our relationship with nature are kind of working around and with each other to set us up for either, to confront the future in a with a strong, good plan, or to fail miserably and then all die in flames. Okay, so I don't want to be predicting lots of doom around this, although that comes up too. We're all here because we're kind of hopeful and also optimistic about what can come out of our collective brain power. But it really is about kind of organizing and thinking about larger shifts than just finding that one super awesome innovation that's going to make climate change go away and then we can all have everything we want forever and ever. It's about sustainability. It's about sufficiency, kind of reducing the pressure that we put on our planet, kind of really deeply examining extractive industries, including institutions that are set up that we're so used to. Like I work a lot with utilities, energy utilities, kind of with regulating them and the laws that determine where they can get their resources from, shifting to renewable off of fossil fuel and all that. And we're looking at how are these institutions formed, who makes those rules, who gets to hold them accountable, how responsive do they have to be to the public they serve, to their customer base, how thoughtful do they have to be about how historically they've how their setup has disproportionately harmed and burdened specific communities. And thinking about that kind of across industries, but specifically in my role at the energy industry. And I don't have that energy background, like I said before, and I don't have that science background. And I wasn't even very strong in policy in my international development role. Previously, it had kind of some other focuses, but what I brought to that was just a lot of curiosity and a kind of willingness to be an advocate. So that means, yes, I'm learning the lingo, I'm learning, what's expected of a policy person to show up in a legislative committee hearing or in a regulatory kind of adjudication or on a proceeding, and other types of meetings and spaces where that kind of policy is normally hashed out, but also how to show up for communities, which means I can't just look like every other standard advocate or lobbyist. I have to be kind of hearing from and speaking for kind of those voices who haven't been here before, but are very, very much impacted by the decisions in those spaces. So that's the purpose of our organization. Is to elevate the voices of frontline communities in the policy space. And that's really how I slotted into my role and can continue to grow and explore opportunities to really to push for the interests of BIPOC and frontline and low-income communities in the climate conversation.
Thanks, Meryl. Matthew, how about your background at your organization? How does that look like? Like, tell us a little bit more about perhaps like what a think tank is, but also kind of on that day-to-day, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so a think tank can mean a lot of different things, but essentially it means that we get paid to think about things. It feels like a very silly way to describe it, but CPI is constructed essentially like a nonprofit consultancy. So we get paid by our clients, many of whom are governments or other philanthropies, some private financial institutions, to write reports or do research into specific topics of interest. So we are, paid to create a deliverable. So in that way, it's a little bit more like consultancy. And the day-to-day looks a little bit different depending on what project you're on, but typically I'm working on 2 to 3 projects at a time, and that's anywhere from proposing a project, creating a budget, going through the contracting to doing initial research, whether that be interviews, data analysis, reading other people's reports, becoming an expert on a specific topic, and then writing the actual report, creating communication materials about it, trying to get that knowledge out into the world. And so the job can be pretty varied. And then I think in terms of, challenges around that, I think one of the big things is trying to get people to fund the kinds of work that we want to do, matching our clients' interests with our interests. It's not a situation where the client wants us to say one sort of thing and we don't feel comfortable with that. It's really just a matter of priorities and establishing that what we think is important to the people who are going to provide us money as well. So I think that's a standard nonprofit challenge, but certainly one that we experience. And then I think the other big thing is just that there are so many perspectives in this space. There's so many challenges and opportunities, and thinking about which, in our limited amount of time, which are the ones that we want to prioritize. We're not an advocacy organization. We sort of play the inside game to Mario's outside game. But we do want it. We're very conscious of other people's perspectives and wanting to make sure that what we're saying is consistent with the broader set of conventional wisdom where that's necessary, but also pushing the boundaries a little bit and making what we're saying something that policymaker who's really busy and has a number of other priorities on their plate, something that they can understand and act on. So I think sort of those are a couple of the challenges we face. Happy to dive into any of those a little bit deeper as helpful.
Thanks, Matthew. And Alex, thinking about your background, it sounds like you are a startup. Would love to hear kind of what that perspective is like as an organization and how does that provide you flexibility? What are these challenges you're coming up against? Would love to hear more about it.
Sure. So Coastal Protection Solutions is 2 years old as of this past March. We have a patent pending and we have a trademark already, and we have won the Harvard Innovation Award for Ingenuity. We've won the Clinton Global Initiative Award for Resilience, and I spoke at COP28 and unveiled the Wavebreaker to people on Ocean Day. So it's been pretty great so far. Having a startup is very difficult. You have to be extremely driven, extremely passionate about the work that you do. There are challenges every single day. Fundraising is extremely challenging. Speaking with VCs and sort of trying to pitch your product all the time. You're doing that constantly, whether you're at a dinner party or whether you are, on a Zoom call with a VC, you're constantly pitching. There's also, I work in STEM, and I am not an engineer, but I work basically in what's called either climate tech, blue tech, ocean tech, or tough tech, which is predominantly male driven. And actually it's been, I have engineers on my team, but they're all male because I actually could not find a female engineer that did coastal work, oceanography. And it's actually quite difficult for me as a female entrepreneur and leader of a company to be in a very male-driven environment. It takes a lot. It's been 2 years of sort of getting a very thick skin. There are a lot of people in the industry that say, this will never happen. And the other challenge is that there are just a lot of people in the world that actually don't believe in climate change and don't believe that hurricanes or typhoons or sea level rise are ever going to affect them. So I work with communities, I work with cities. I have a meeting with the city of Boston this week and the city of Miami in a couple of weeks to try to implement, these structures to protect these communities from climate change.
Thanks, Alex. I genuinely appreciate everybody sharing a little bit more about the high impact work that you're doing, as well as some of the challenges that you face during this. I'm going to call a little bit of an audible on some of these questions here because I sense a little bit of a common theme emerging that's kind of relevant to our set of questions here around careers in this area. It sounds like all three of you, as well as myself, we all made a somewhat earlier mid-career pivot to really hone in on climate a little bit deeper. And I think that might ring true for a lot of folks in the audience that, as we're getting more experience, we're thinking about different ways we can translate our skills to impact. So would love to hear maybe in a little bit more detail, like what advice might you have for folks in the audience who are thinking about pivots, but more specifically, when you decided to do your pivot, what were those first steps that you took and what did that look like for you? So I don't know if anybody wants to start first, but it sounds like we all might have something to contribute to that.
I'll go on that. I think I might have the most unconventional University of Chicago story. So I graduated in 2002 with a visual arts degree. I was a professional working artist for a couple of years until I did not feel passionate enough to wake up every morning and create art. And so basically I became a professional chef working in Michelin-starred kitchens, working in startups as well, and in the food and beverage industry, working at Food Network and developing their brand. So was very, very, very happy in the food industry. And, the Hurricane Sandy hit and basically shifted the way that I looked at life and the world, because I saw my community hurting so much. So I actually shifted to starting a company in New York City, and it was basically developing flood resistant landscapes to redesign my community for the next hurricane. And so I did that for 7 years and managed a successful company, and just felt at the time that I wasn't doing enough and on a big enough scale. And so that's why I went to graduate school and pursued this crazy idea that I had on the beach in 2012. And it actually, people said it made sense. So I went forward with it.
Thanks, Alex. Matthew or Mario?
I can jump in next just with a couple quick things. So I think that the way that I, landed on climate change is the thing that I wanted to work on was a little bit circuitous, maybe not quite as circuitous as Alex's journey through the food world, which all sounds very cool. But I think if I could do it again, maybe some advice I would give. A couple of things. I think one is just talk to as many people as you can. Obviously not everyone has time and availability to speak, but I think it was really helpful to get different perspectives, hear from all the different interesting things that people are doing and the types of organizations that they're in. That was really eye-opening for me. And then the second is to you don't have to become an expert on all things climate change. Like you don't have to become a climate science expert. But I think having the base level understanding of what is climate change, but also reading the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's reports, maybe not all of the hundreds of pages, but just reading the summary of policymakers. I think they had just had their sixth report, AR6, that they released, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, that details in great depth, what's causing climate change, what the current trends are, what the solution set looks like, what adaptation possibilities are. And I think that having that grounding in what is the current status is really helpful, because it's changing constantly, but actually really deeply understanding where we are and what the solution set looks like is helpful. And then from there, you can dive very deeply if you want to work in solar, if you want to work in
I think we got you back, Matthew. You just cut out there for a second.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Seem to be having some internet issues, but yeah, I was done speaking, so happy to turn it over.
Yeah.
No,
Mario?
second everything that was kind of said before about being in tune with yourself, what your interests and passions are, and knowing that that can change. Knowing what your skills are, and knowing that those can also evolve and grow. There's no point where you're like, I'm done. This is all the knowledge I have, and so I've got to see who can hire me for what I have. You can always learn something new. Talking to people, networking, and kind of leveraging all of those opportunities. Where I am now is because I was able to network. I was able to afford to network, including volunteering with 2 local organizations, going to working their events, and talking to the people who showed up to these climate events. Because I had some savings, because I had a partner, it was kind of making money, and I just had that flexibility. But if you don't, whatever you're doing, whatever you need to do to get by, you can find a way to leverage that. So just being thoughtful and creative about it, open-minded about the opportunities that might not look like next year. There will be new opportunities that don't look what they looked last year. So, yeah, just keep open eyes.
Thank you. That's a really great segue to, I think one of the areas I really want to hone in on are sort of practical takeaways for folks in the audience today, thinking about things they could be working on. I think Matthew, you mentioned the IPCC report as, helpful reading. But I also am kind of picking up on some themes here that a lot of all of your pivots involve, your transferable skills of industries that you're in the past or passions that you had, and really bringing those to where you go next. So I really encourage folks in the audience to think, it can be a very transformative pivot or change that you'd like to make, but it's very likely you already have everything in your toolkit that you need to do, and it just involves meeting the right folks. So I think, looking ahead, panelists, as we speak to the audience here about, things that audience members could be doing, I'm thinking namely about where do you see opportunities on the horizon in your respective industries? Because as you just mentioned, Marielle, the opportunities tomorrow are not necessarily the same as what we have right now. That's very true. I know working with students I'm coaching them to pursue careers that didn't exist 5, 10 years ago when, or whenever we were coming out of college. So love to hear from panelists on specific opportunities where you see your sector that might be heading, and sort of alongside that, if you do have like helpful resources, reports, readings, where do you keep up to speed? I have a long list of things that I read on a regular basis, kind of keep in touch with the industry, including things like Climate Tech VC newsletter, which I really like. Encourage everybody to subscribe if you're not on that. So I'd love to hear from the three of you, kind of how do you get up to speed? And then alongside of that, what are those opportunities out there? I don't know if anybody has any burgeoning ideas they'd like to start with. Matthew.
Yeah, happy to go, and apologies for my internet challenges. So yeah, I have a list of resources as well. Happy to share that with Will afterwards, and can send that out if people are interested. But yeah, I try to read, a lot of news. I would say, at this point, it's sort of skimming for new trends, new things of interest, some of which is relevant to sorry about that. I think I cut out. But if you're interested in accounting, then you can be an accountant at a climate company. If you're interested in being a lawyer, then you can be a lawyer at a climate company or a climate organization. So I would think about it in that way, but also, I think to Marielle's point, like your individual set of skills and knowledge is going to be changing, but also the world is changing constantly. The types of technologies that exist, the types of needs and the types of people that the world needs are constantly changing. So I would say dive in, and you can always change your job. You can always switch industries. But I think that for me, I kind of wish that I had just dove in a little bit sooner and just not take the first job that is available, but just go in. Like you don't have to be in the perfect industry, but just try to make it so that your full-time job is something where you can learn more about the kind of industry you want to be in.
Yeah, everything kind of Matthew said, and for me, it was actually extra important to be with the team. I really liked. I didn't know that everything would be going virtual so soon, and that's actually facilitated me continuing to kind of pursue and grow in my career, despite moves, despite kind of starting a family, and then global pandemic. But I mean, if you're starting from total scratch, it is like kind of the networking, using the alumni networks. And sometimes it's, if you know where you want to be based, kind of where you live, and you want to, do you want to do local? Do you want to do national or global? Are you looking government side? Lots of money coming in under our current kind of administration, and what the Congress has passed for kind of federal funding through EPA, grants for greenhouse gas reduction, solar for all. And then at the state level, there's often kind of a lot of funds that are either channeling those federal funds or kind of states that are embedding in their budget really dedicated investments in kind of capital projects or kind of community resiliency hubs and projects and kind of climate financing. And so you can work in the kind of government side and the public sector to figure out programming, and then how funds are going to be granted out. Who are the contractors going to be? You can work for those contractors and firms. Sometimes you just Google green climate, like going through Indeed or whichever kind of job sites, and seeing who claims to be environmentally or climate oriented, and then what are they looking for? Research, analysis, analytics, accounting, kind of communications, or whichever kind of types of roles. And there are all types of roles that are seeking to be, that these organizations are seeking to fill. And I'm more nonprofit side, definitely local, like we're looking at Washington policy, but we're tapped into what's going on regionally and certainly at the national level, especially around funding. And then whether that funding is going to be available if there's a change in administration, and under the next kind of presidency or the next Congress, that might shift. But at the state level, it's less likely to. So definitely kind of tune into that, because that also can give a lot of clues about where the industry is going. Let's build out this new kind of hydrogen technology as an energy source. But we got to kind of keep an eye on utility scale growth around other more established renewables that are still like a tiny fraction of energy producers. And I mean, I could speak a bit more to energy, transportation, agriculture and other areas are growing too. But kind of think about how much money you have to make, and then how much you're willing to accept also, because that will vary, like your the salary and that will change depending on what you're in. But there you can survive, you can live well, even in the nonprofit side. A lot of philanthropic organizations are funding their own initiatives, and they want to be competitive and they want the best, in really thinking about more of a socially oriented kind of pursuit of kind of climate policies, climate programs, climate innovations.
So on my end, the trends that I'm seeing, so I'm in climate tech, so you have to bear with me. I'm not in policy. I'm building stuff, and the trends that I'm seeing are people, for a while were just focused on mitigation, carbon capture, carbon reduction, and most recently, this past year, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is headed by Bill Gates, put out a call for ventures that are doing adaptation and resilience, which is exactly what I'm doing. So we're thinking more towards, how do we last as human beings on this planet in the next 50 years, until we have figured out a solution for carbon capture. That being said, so 2 years ago, I had no idea other than what was commonly known about climate change. So I had to really get myself up to speed and become an expert on this to lead my company. And so what I did, so I was fortunate enough to be at Harvard grad school. So I did try to leverage every single one of the grad schools and figure out who was working in the climate space and have coffee with them, have lunch with them, go to events. I stayed in Boston after graduating last year, not because the winters are so nice. They're actually, Chicago's worse, but it's terrible. So, but I'm here because there's a huge climate tech community in Boston. And so I go to events all the time. And so I really would say, if you're really interested in this space, it's not just about reading, it's about getting to know what other people are doing. And then to do that, you have to go and meet people and shake hands and be inquisitive. And you'll slowly but surely gain a completely new climate tech network, which I did in the 2 years. And I would say that there are lots of different options, whether there'll be newsletters. I personally am subscribed to a couple of WhatsApp climate groups that are filled with policymakers, that are filled with climate ventures and VCs that, you know, constantly update everyone on what's going on. So I'm really, you know, up to date on the latest of what's happening, you know, specifically in mitigation and climate capture, and also, you know, policy. So I would say if you can find a WhatsApp group for climate that's in your community, like if it's in Chicago, if it's in, I'm sure they have plenty in California. I would definitely do that. It's very educating. So you guys can definitely get up to speed. It took me 2 years. That doesn't mean it has to take you 2 years.
Thanks, Alex. I agree, Kashima. We have time for about one more question, I think. And I'm going to end up on an important one, but as I'm doing this, I definitely encourage everyone in the audience to think about if they have questions for our panelists in the last segment here, to drop them in that Q&A feature right at the bottom of Zoom. So I'd love to hear from all three panelists. I know sometimes, at least working in climate can get a rap sometimes for it can be very challenging personally. It can sometimes be hard to get motivating. Sometimes, especially folks working in a space, see themselves working on very urgent, very pressing, important things. And sometimes it's hard to get everybody aligned on the same page. And it's sometimes hard to, you know, stay motivated, and can be sometimes very hard to just keep up momentum, I know, generally, working on such momentous things. So I'd love to hear from the three of you. How do you stay resilient? How do you stay motivated? How do you face challenges? Kind of because sometimes the personal is global and the global is personal. So don't know who wants to start first, but want to pose this to all three of you.
I'll jump in quickly.
Thanks.
Motivated. I have family. I have 3 young guys. This is the youngest. He's 3 months. And I just think about their future all the time. I was always personally interested in waste reduction and fighting, like, oh gosh, plastics are taking over everything. Just in my personal life, what can I do better to not feel overwhelmed by, you know, consumerism and so many things that can overwhelm you. And then in the professional life and personal life, that space is how I continue to kind of tap into what I can do specifically for my career and this role, but for the world. I'm thinking like, this is a bigger issue than me and my life. I want the future to work for these little guys and for everyone. It's just this can't be the direction our world is going in. It is so wrong. And what Matthew was saying before, seems like nothing was happening. No one was really solving this. And now there's a lot of ideas, but they're still pretty disparate. So pulling them together, getting on board with the plan, convincing those, like Alex was saying, who don't believe in this, you gotta believe in this, or not letting those naysayers and denialists remain in power wherever they are. You just gotta keep, we can't give up. We can't give up. Please don't.
I can jump in next and just totally agree with what Mariel was saying, and I think a couple of different answers, and really appreciate the question, Will. I think it's not talked about enough, but I will say compared to when I wasn't working in this space, I feel less stressed just because it's my job. I feel like I'm doing I'm doing my part, and so I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm not sure what the mechanism is, but like I don't feel that sense of like overwhelming, like what is going on, why is no one trying to fix this, and it's nice. And to Alex's point, being a part of a community of people who are actively trying to work on this, and it's great I find when I go to events and when I meet other interested people, whether they're policymakers or technology people or just interested people in the local community, it's really helpful and very motivating. And just 2 other short things. One is like being mindful of your mental health, and this is a 30, 40, 50 years, this is going to be my career. And that means that I have to take vacation sometimes. That means that I have to, like, maybe there are days I'm just like not going to read the news about the latest. And then one other thing is just getting involved in your local community. I think that that's been really helpful for me. You know, I'm in a city of 12,000 people, and you know, I'm on the local bike and pedestrian committee, and like, you know, it's a really small thing, but it's really great to see the kinds of change that we can have in our local environment without, you know, acknowledging that that's not going to solve the problem, but it can make the world, you know, it can make my world better. It can make the world of people around me better.
Yeah, so from my perspective, you can see the world very grimly from the science that's out there about climate change, and that we're, you know, above the 1.5. But in order to be in this field, you really have to have tremendous hope in the future, and hope that people in this field and in politics and in policy and globally are fighting for the same thing. I deal with disasters on a daily basis. I deal with communities calling me, asking for help because they don't have any more beaches and they're afraid that it's going to take down their homes. But I think there's hope. I think that that we can build technologies like mine, like many other people are building. We can build natural processes, and people are working on that right now. So it's actually a very exciting time. And I lastly would say that I know that most people wouldn't have this experience, and I would hope not. But the thing that actually keeps me motivated to work every single day is there was a moment where when I came into the neighborhood of Sandy, and I saw my block and it was covered in dirt, and all my neighbors were just completely gray from not knowing what the future holds. I envision that moment, and I say that I never want that to happen to any other community in the world, and I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure that that doesn't happen. So my point is that I hope that you have never experienced that, but my point is that whatever you have that you can harness to move you forward in terms of climate change, whether it's your children, whether it's experiences that you've had, whether your air conditioner blew out in the summer and it was so hot that, you know, you got sick, just think about that when things get tough, and just move on, because things are going to be okay.
Thank you, Alex, for your inspiring words here. I want to open up one last time. If there's any other questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box here. I know, Adrienne, you've been going back and forth with us, which has been awesome. Thank you for doing so. And I think panelists, if you have any specific feedback, feel free to drop that in chat. In terms of, I don't think I see any other per se open questions right now. But if they do, feel free to pop it in the last minute here. But I definitely want to sort of cap us off in the last few minutes that we have here. For any closing thoughts from panelists in terms of final piece of advice, words. I might jump in if I see something pop through the Q&A, and I do. And I'm actually going to take this one, I think, and I would encourage folks to tackle this in their closing statements as well. We have an audience member who might be a young alum who might be thinking about entry-level kind of climate careers. And this is something I frequently talk about with students, as well as I think the three of you might actually think about as well. Because frequently the entry level career points are the same kind of entry points you might have in other industries or functional areas. So for audience members out there who might be thinking about a pivot, whether it's this year or in a few years from now, I encourage you to think about what skills you have today and finding alums or other like inspiring organizations or other folks that you know who are doing important work that you're interested in, and taking a look at how they got there, because I think it's interesting. You take a look at the four of us. None of us started off as climate analyst one at a large corporation per se. We all kind of blazed our own pathways in different ways, pursuing things that we were interested in. Whether that's starting off in energy or environmental protection or climate justice and advocacy and organizing work. A lot of folks get their start where they can find experience and where they like to make an impact, and which is relevant for them and the community that they live within. Which kind of leads me to the last piece of advice, or I frequently talk about, or one theme that I want to connect from the three of you before closing this off, is that I think all three of you kind of iterated that you got involved with what you did because you raised your hand and you were engaged. You showed up to a community meeting, you saw a problem going on, you wanted to get more involved. This is a pretty typical thing that I see, that folks who really do derive meaning and impact from their careers are generally doing the homework and raising their hands and getting involved and rolling up their sleeves and doing some work. So I'm happy to stick around, Kashima, if there's a few extra minutes for any last minute questions, but I definitely want to give time for any closing thoughts from our panelists here. And then Kashima, I know you have one last closing thought here. So how does that sound? Great. Panelists, we could take this in reverse order. Alex, do you want to start wrapping us up?
Yeah, I would say if you are thinking about a climate career, please do it, because we need all hands on deck. I would say don't be afraid of the daunting task of switching careers. It's not easy, but it is 100% possible. And I would say, get involved with your community, get involved with the climate space in your towns, and you will find people that are interested in hiring, whether it be for internships or entry-level positions. There's a lot out there. The climate space is huge, and we need you.
I can jump in next. Completely agree with Alex. When I was writing some notes for this, my advice was just do it! ! So completely agree. And I think to the points that have been brought up, I think Mario said this well. Like, think about kind of what type of job you want, what kinds of skills you have to offer, the types of organizations that you want to be at. Do you want to be in a private company? Do you want to be at a big company, small company, government job, advocacy? Do you want to work with data? Do you want to work on finance or communications or art, or there are all these. There's a lot of options, and so I would think about it in some ways like you would think about kind of what non-climate job would you want if climate wasn't an issue. And then I think also to Will's point, like, just start getting involved. Your career is going to be one way you're going to contribute to this, but if something that I learned through my attempts to switch jobs was that people like to see that you are engaged in the issue or an issue in a different way, whether that's if you're interested in data, maybe just do a data analysis on a climate topic you're interested in, go to an event and meet people and talk to people, read reports on the topic you're interested in, start volunteering at a local organization, or do some part-time consulting for a company. I think that there's a lot of different options, but getting your foot in the door will help you look like a better candidate and more engaged, but will also give you a sense of what kinds of things you're interested in, both from a sector perspective, but like the types of roles you want. I think that's hard as a entry level. When you think about entry level roles, is there's so many different jobs, and you won't know what you like until you start, and then you can always, if you decide that's not for you, you can always change. So don't feel like you're you're hemming yourself in too much.
There's not a ton to add to that. So much great advice has been shared throughout the panel, and then just now in the other panelists' final thoughts. And so much of that worked for me, kind of continues to work for me, and it's what I see from new colleagues who are joining our organization. When asks are put out by environmental justice, social justice, kind of funders, and even kind of the government jobs that are all circulated. I'm seeing them through my email. Hey, do you know someone? Could you share this with your networks? Kind of we're looking for some new folks. Keep an eye out. And then that's just going to work, both demonstrating. I think I have an interest in this because I have volunteered. I've produced these work products that are relevant. I've done this type of research. I've
Stepped on your mute, Mario.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what the last thing you heard was, but I was just definitely seconding everyone's advice and saying like also what will work for you. Just don't give up if the first 2-3 things don't, or if you don't get an interview with every single application you submit. And my job, I did not submit an application. It was literally, I had coffee with the head of an organization who I was connected to through a friend of my husband's actually. And after the coffee was like, hey, we have this one thing that we need someone's help with. I did that one thing, and then they asked me to do another thing, and then half a year later, I'm being offered a job. Not everyone can replicate that, but you're going to have a path that someone else can't replicate. So just be open to the opportunities, and please stay involved, stay interested.
Well, thank you so much, Mario, and thank you to all the panelists for taking time out of your lunchtime today to talk to us really from across the country about their career and climate. So thank you all very much. It's not the same giving a round of applause on virtual, but happy to do so virtually. So without further ado, I'm going to wrap this up here. But before we do, Kashima, you want to take over? I know you had one last final thought to share.
Yes, I wanted to say thank you to our panel for leading us through this really engaging conversation. To wrap up, I do want to plug that we do have career coaches available to alumni. So if you are considering pivoting your career or need help getting into an industry, we do have some people available to assist you all. So I'm just going to drop the link in the chat here to a list of our